Hi, Reddit. I'm Ellie, 28, female. And to put it bluntly, I was never supposed to exist, at least not as a girl. That sounds dramatic, but it's the truth. My mom always dreamed of having two boys. She wanted her perfect, sporty little team of sons to carry on the family name and be everything she'd envisioned in her head. When she got pregnant with me and found out I was a girl, she was devastated. My Aunt Rachel, who I'm still close with, once told me something I've never been able to shake. Apparently, when my mom found out I was a girl, she actually looked into terminating the pregnancy. By the time she got serious about it, it was too late and considered risky. So I was born, not as a blessing, but as a regret. Mom never outright told me I was unwanted, but she didn't have to. It was in the way she looked at me, the way she treated me, and honestly, the way she talked about me when she didn't think I was listening. I was a fussy baby, a needy toddler, and later a difficult child. Nothing I did was ever good enough. And then there was my older brother, Jake, 30 male, who could do no wrong. Jake was their golden boy, the apple of their eye. He was everything I wasn't. Confident, charming, and honestly, a complete jerk. But my parents didn't see that. To them, Jake was perfect. If you ask them back then, or even now, he practically walked on water. Jake wasn't just the favorite, he was the villain in my story. He made it his life's mission to make me miserable. Growing up, Jake had this knack for getting me into trouble. If something went wrong in the house, it was always Ellie did it. He broke Mom's favorite vase. Must have been me. He took money out of Dad's wallet. Obviously, my fault. He'd come up with these wild, detailed lies, and no matter how absurd they sounded, my parents always believed him. It got to a point where I didn't even bother defending myself anymore. What was the point? They never listened. Jake was always just being a kid, or didn't mean any harm, while I was labeled as the troublemaker who needed to learn how to behave. But Jake didn't stop at just lying. He made school hell for me too. He spread rumors about me to my classmates, sometimes in ways that were so subtle I didn't even realize it was him at first. I'd notice friends pulling away, acting distant, and then find out weeks later that Jake had told them I said something nasty about them, or that I was too weird to hang out with. By the time I hit middle school, I didn't have many close friends left. I couldn't bring people over to the house because Jake would either humiliate me in front of them or later use whatever he overheard against me. He'd twist my words and make it sound like I was bad-mouthing our parents or being ungrateful. And of course, Mom and Dad believed him every single time. The favoritism was glaringly obvious. For example, every year Jake got a big birthday party with all his friends, fancy decorations, and even a rented bounce house one time. When it came to my birthday, it was a cake at the dining table and maybe a card if they remembered. One year, they forgot entirely. Jake made sure to rub that one in. "Guess you're just not that important," he sneered. It's not like I was a perfect child or anything. I wasn't super outgoing, and yeah, I was a bit sensitive. But can you blame me? Growing up in a house where I was constantly put down or ignored took a toll on me. I felt like I was screaming into a void, desperate for someone to notice me, to care. But the only people who seemed to matter in that house were Jake and my parents. And Jake, he reveled in it. He knew he was the favorite, and he used that power against me every chance he got. If I ever dared to call him out or stand up for myself, he'd run to Mom and Dad spinning some story about how I was being mean to him or starting fights. It didn't matter that he was the instigator. He was the golden child, and I was the problem. I remember one time in high school when I finally thought I'd caught a break. I'd worked up the courage to try out for the school play. I wasn't the lead or anything, but I got a decent role, and for once I was proud of myself. I told my parents about it, hoping maybe they'd come see me perform. Jake immediately jumped in with, "Why would anyone want to watch her embarrass herself on stage?" My mom didn't even defend me. She just shrugged and said, "Maybe next time, Ellie." That was the moment I realized they weren't just indifferent. They were actively uninterested in me. Jake wasn't just cruel, he was calculated. He knew exactly how to get under my skin and make me feel small. And the worst part, he never faced any consequences for it. Mom and Dad never called him out or punished him. If anything, they encouraged it by always taking his side. Every day felt like a battle I was destined to lose. I'd try to focus on school or my hobbies, but Jake was always there, lurking in the background, ready to tear me down. And my parents, they didn't care. To them, Jake could do no wrong, and I was just there, a mistake they couldn't undo. And yet somehow I survived. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the faint hope that one day things would get better. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't force people to love you. You just have to find the strength to walk away. And that's exactly what I did later. By the time I turned 18, I was done. Like completely done with my family. I knew the only way I'd ever have a chance at real happiness was to get out of there. So I put everything I had into school. I wasn't just trying to get good grades, I was fighting for freedom. I worked my butt off to get a scholarship to a college out of state. I applied to every program, wrote essay after essay, and spent hours filling out financial aid forms. The moment I got my acceptance letter from a school in California with a partial scholarship, I cried, not because I was sad, but because I finally saw a way out. The day I left for college, I didn't even get so much as a "we'll miss you" from my parents. They helped Jake pack up and move into his fully furnished apartment when he decided to live on his own. Me, I got a pat on the back and a good luck. My mom even had the nerve to say, "Don't forget to call us if you need help," knowing full well they wouldn't lift a finger. Jake stayed in our tiny Illinois hometown. Of course, my parents paid for everything, his rent, his car, even his groceries. Meanwhile, I was on my own. I remember walking into my dorm room, looking around at the bare walls, and realizing this was the first time I was truly free. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Once I left, my parents wasted no time cutting me out of their lives. At first, I tried keeping in touch. I called them a couple of times, but the conversations were short and awkward. They never asked how I was doing or how school was going. They just updated me on Jake's life. How he got a new car, how he was hosting some big party, how he and his girlfriend Sarah at the time were getting serious. It didn't take long for me to realize they didn't care about my life at all. So I stopped calling, and honestly, they didn't seem to notice. Our family group chat became the Jake Show. It was all about his accomplishments, like how he grilled the best steak at a BBQ, or how he was thinking of starting his own business, which never happened. Meanwhile, I was balancing 15 credit hours, 2 part-time jobs, and endless study sessions just to keep my scholarship. There were days when I didn't know how I was going to make it. I'd work late shifts at a campus coffee shop, then stay up until 2 a.m. cramming for exams. I lived on instant ramen and dollar store mac and cheese because that's all I could afford. Some days, I felt like I was barely holding it together, but I refused to call home for help. Not that they would have offered any, but I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me struggle. Even when things got tough, I couldn't bring myself to regret leaving. My senior year of college was a turning point for me. That's when I met Ethan, the man who would eventually become my husband. I wasn't looking for a relationship at the time. I was too busy trying to survive. But Ethan kind of fell into my life in the best way possible. We met during a group project in one of my classes. He was one of those people who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just for the project, but for who I was as a person. At first, I was hesitant. I wasn't used to people being kind without some ulterior motive, thanks to my family. But Ethan wasn't like that. He was patient and kind, and he made me feel like I was worth something. One of the things that stood out to me the most about Ethan was his family. I'll never forget the first time he invited me to dinner at his parents' house. I was so nervous, but they made me feel welcome from the moment I walked through the door. His mom hugged me like she'd known me forever, and his dad joked about how Ethan never brought anyone home unless they were the real deal. They asked about my life, my classes, and my plans for the future. They listened, like actually listened. It was such a stark contrast to my own family that I didn't know how to react at first. But over time, I started to let my guard down. Ethan's family became the support system I never had. His mom would send me care packages during finals week filled with snacks and little notes of encouragement. His dad offered to help me fix my car when it broke down, even though he barely knew me at the time. They treated me better in a month than my own parents had my entire life. Graduating college felt like the ultimate victory. My parents didn't come to my graduation, of course, but Ethan and his family were there cheering me on. After graduation, Ethan and I moved in together. We didn't have much, but we made it work. I got a job in marketing, and he started working as an engineer. We built a life together piece by piece, and for the first time, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. My wedding was the final nail in the coffin for me and my family. I think a lot of people have this idea that weddings bring families together, that they're this magical event where even the most strained relationships can heal. Yeah, that wasn't my experience. My wedding didn't bring my family closer. It exposed, actually confirmed, just how little they cared about me. When Ethan proposed, I was over the moon. He popped the question on a quiet hike, just the two of us. It was simple and perfect, exactly what I wanted. After I got home, I took a picture of the ring and sent it to my family group chat with a little "I said yes" message. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but I thought I'd at least get a congrats or some kind of acknowledgement. Instead, nothing. I got left on read. I checked the chat later that night, and I could see they'd all read the message. My mom didn't reply. My dad didn't reply. And Jake, of course not. I even double-checked to make sure the message was actually sent. It was. They just chose to ignore it. That was the first time I realized they probably weren't going to care about my wedding at all. And I was right. As I started planning, I kept trying to include them. I'd send my mom texts asking for her opinion on things like venues or color schemes. Nothing big, just stuff like, "What do you think of these flowers?" Or, "Do you have any recommendations for a dress shop?" Half the time she wouldn't reply. The other half, she'd give me these one-word answers like "nice" or "pretty," which basically screamed, "I don't care." At one point, I even asked if she wanted to come with me to look at dresses. She said she was too busy. Too busy doing what? I have no idea. Watching TV, maybe. So I just stopped sending anything. Meanwhile, Ethan's mom was over the moon. She helped me pick out my dress, organize the guest list, and even spent an entire weekend DIYing centerpieces with me. She made me feel like I actually mattered. Jake, on the other hand, took it a step further. Not only did he not care about my wedding, but he actively tried to sabotage it. My cousin Megan, the only family member I still talk to, she's now renting a room in my parents' house because her parents are in a different country and were worried about her living on her own, later told me how Jake convinced my parents that I was disrespectful and ungrateful for not involving them enough in the wedding prep. He told them I didn't care about their opinions and that I was intentionally leaving them out of everything. What really pissed me off was that it wasn't true. I tried. I reached out. I asked for their help. They were the ones who didn't care. They were the ones who ignored me. But of course, Jake spun it like I was the bad guy. And my parents, being who they are, were easily convinced. Things escalated when I sent out the wedding invitations. I included my parents and Jake, of course, even though I was starting to wonder why I bothered. A few weeks later, I called my mom to ask if they'd RSVP'd yet because I hadn't heard anything. Her response? "Oh, we haven't decided if we're coming yet. Jake said we should think about it." Think about it? What was there to think about? It was my wedding. I was their daughter. But apparently Jake had been telling them how I didn't deserve their support. He told them I only reached out to them when I wanted something and that I didn't truly value them as a family. That was rich coming from Jake, who spent his entire life taking from them without giving anything back. He got everything handed to him on a silver platter. But somehow I was the ungrateful one for not worshiping them the way he did. As the wedding got closer, it became clear they weren't coming. My mom stopped responding to my messages altogether, and my dad barely said 2 words to me when I called. Megan tried to convince them to change their minds, but Jake doubled down, telling them they were supposed to be the center of everything. The irony of that statement still makes me laugh. I literally asked them to be part of the process. I wanted them to be involved, but they made it clear over and over again that they didn't want to step in, and now they were twisting it. The wedding day came and they weren't there. No text, no call, nothing. Just empty seats where my parents and brother should have been. I won't lie, it hurt. Even though I knew not to expect much from them, it still stung to look out into the crowd and not see them there. But Ethan's family, they showed up in full force. His parents, his siblings, his cousins, they were all there cheering us on and celebrating with us. His mom even gave a little toast during the reception, saying how proud they were to officially welcome me into the family. After the wedding, I decided I was done. I didn't call my parents to ask why they didn't come. I didn't send them pictures or updates. I didn't even bother replying when Jake sent me a snarky text saying, "Hope your big day was worth ignoring your family." I blocked Jake's number after that. I figured there was no point in keeping the lines of communication open when all he ever did was tear me down. If they didn't want to be part of my life, that was their choice, but I wasn't going to keep trying for people who couldn't even bother to show up for me. So while I was over in California building a life with Ethan, my brother Jake stayed back home basking in his golden child glory. If you've been keeping up, you already know that my parents worshiped the ground Jake walked on. That didn't change when he got married. In fact, it only got worse. Jake married Sarah, and my parents went all out for their wedding. I didn't get an invite. Not that I'd have gone, but my cousin Megan kept me in the loop. She told me they practically covered everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, even Sarah's dream dress. Megan said the whole thing probably cost more than what most people spend on a down payment for a house. Speaking of houses, guess who got one of those too? Yep, Jake and Sarah didn't even have to worry about buying their first home because my parents bought it for them. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a nice suburban neighborhood, all fully furnished. Meanwhile, I was over here in California working 2 jobs just to save up for a decent apartment with Ethan. Megan would call me every once in a while with updates about Jake's charmed life. According to her, my parents were over at his house constantly doting on him and Sarah like they were royalty. They'd babysit their dog, help with landscaping, and even stock their fridge when Sarah didn't feel like grocery shopping. I'll admit, hearing all that stung a little. Not because I wanted their help, I'd been fine on my own for years, but because it was just another reminder of how differently they treated us. When I got married, they couldn't even bother to send me a text. But for Jake, the sky was the limit. For a while, everything seemed picture perfect for Jake and Sarah. My parents bragged about them to anyone who would listen, acting like they were the epitome of success. Megan told me how they'd gush about how Jake found such a wonderful wife, and how they were building such a beautiful life together. But then things started to shift. After a couple of years, my parents started dropping hints about grandchildren. At first it was subtle, little comments about how a baby would make their family complete or how they couldn't wait to spoil a grandchild. But subtlety isn't really their strong suit, so it quickly escalated. Megan told me my mom became borderline obsessed with the idea of grandkids. She'd bring it up every chance she got, pestering Jake and Sarah about when they were going to start a family. My dad wasn't much better. He'd make comments about continuing the family name and how it was Jake's responsibility as the eldest son to carry on the legacy. I wasn't surprised, honestly. My parents have always been weirdly traditional, especially when it comes to family stuff. They don't just want grandkids. They want biological grandkids. Adoption? Not an option in their eyes. It had to be blood-related grandchildren, preferably a boy, to carry on the name. Jake and Sarah, for their part, tried to dodge the topic for as long as they could. Megan said Sarah would laugh it off or change the subject, while Jake would make vague excuses about not being ready yet. But my parents weren't buying it. They started pushing harder to the point where it became this constant source of tension. Megan told me about one family dinner where my mom straight up asked Sarah if she was on birth control and when she planned to stop taking it. Sarah looked mortified, but my mom didn't care. One day, during one of my regular catch-up calls with Megan, she told me that Jake and Sarah had been trying to have kids. They just weren't telling anyone. Yeah, apparently they had been trying for over a year, doing the whole fertility specialist thing, and the news wasn't good. Jake had some kind of condition. Megan didn't know all the details. That made it almost impossible for him to have biological children. Sarah was fine medically. It was all on Jake's side. And here's where it gets messy. Jake and Sarah didn't tell my parents right away. Honestly, I get it. Knowing my mom and dad, they wouldn't have been supportive or understanding. They would have been disappointed, and not the aw shucks kind of disappointed, the kind where they make you feel like you've personally let them down and disgraced the entire family. Jake and Sarah kept it under wraps for a while, but secrets like that don't stay hidden forever, especially in our family. My parents were relentless about the whole grandchild thing. Every time they saw Jake and Sarah, they'd drop comments about when they were going to have kids. Not if, always when. Megan told me it all came to a head during a family dinner. My mom was doing her usual thing, grilling Sarah about babies, saying stuff like, "Oh, you're not getting any younger," and "You should really think about starting now before it's too late." Sarah finally snapped and said something like, "It's not that simple, okay?" That's when the truth came out. She spilled everything. The fertility issues, the specialist visits, all of it. My parents' reaction was about as bad as you'd expect. Megan said they didn't even try to comfort Jake or Sarah. My mom just sat there looking like someone had told her Christmas was canceled, and my dad muttered something about how they should have told them sooner. Real supportive, right? After that, things got weird. My parents didn't come right out and say they were mad at Jake, but you could tell they were. The way Megan described it, it was like a switch flipped. My mom stopped calling Jake every day, and my dad didn't swing by their house as often. They still doted on Sarah, probably because they saw her as their last hope for grandkids. But Jake? Not so much. Megan said my mom started making passive-aggressive comments about adoption like, "Well, I guess it's better than nothing. It's not the same, though, is it?" She'd go on and on about how their friends were all real grandparents with real grandkids. My dad, on the other hand, kept talking about how Jake needed to figure it out. Like, what was he supposed to do? Snap his fingers and magically fix his infertility? Jake, for once in his life, didn't know how to handle the pressure. He'd spent his whole life being the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Now, suddenly, he wasn't living up to their expectations, and it was eating him alive. Megan told me Jake started acting out in ways that weren't like him. He was snapping at Sarah, picking fights over stupid things, and even lashing out at my parents during family gatherings. He'd always been good at staying on their good side, but now he was struggling to keep it together. Sarah wasn't handling it much better. Megan said she was tired of being treated like a baby-making machine. She started avoiding family events altogether. And when she did show up, she barely spoke to anyone. It was obvious she was over it. One night, Megan called me with an update that really drove home how bad things had gotten. Apparently, Jake had a meltdown at another family dinner. Are we noticing a pattern here? My mom had made some comment about how disappointing it was that she might never have biological grandkids, and Jake just lost it. He told them they were being selfish, and that this wasn't something he could control. Megan said my parents were stunned. My mom tried to guilt trip him, saying stuff like, "We're only thinking about the family. Don't you know how much this means to us?" But Jake wasn't having it. He stormed out and Sarah followed him. Here's the thing. Part of me felt bad for Jake. Infertility isn't something anyone chooses, and the way my parents reacted was awful. But another part of me, I couldn't help but think he was finally getting a taste of what it was like to be on the other side of their impossible expectations. He'd never had to deal with their disapproval or their guilt trips because he could do no wrong in their eyes. Now he was learning what it felt like to not measure up, and it was clearly breaking him. Megan told me my parents started putting more pressure on Sarah after that. They were still hung up on the idea of biological grandkids, and they didn't care how it happened. They kept pushing for solutions that were completely unrealistic, like expensive treatments that Jake and Sarah couldn't afford without help. The whole thing became this toxic cycle. My parents would pressure Jake and Sarah, they'd push back, and then my parents would double down. It was like no one could admit that maybe, just maybe, things weren't going to turn out the way they wanted. I felt bad for Sarah. She didn't sign up for this level of crazy when she married Jake. On the other hand, I couldn't feel too sorry for him. After a while, my parents were furious and threatened to cut Jake off financially unless he could fix the situation. And of course, Jake couldn't afford living without their help. He'd been almost completely dependent on them. And because my parents are all about bloodlines and family legacy, their brilliant solution was for Jake to come crawling to me. They wanted him to convince me to give my unborn baby their last name. Not just my baby, their legacy. The audacity, right? Megan called me one night, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "Ellie," she said, "Jake's desperate. They're putting so much pressure on him, and now he's coming for you. Be careful." Sure enough, a couple of days later, Jake showed up unannounced at my house in California. Let me tell you, seeing him on my doorstep was surreal. He looked nothing like the smug, arrogant brother I remembered. Instead, he looked tired and defeated, like life had finally smacked him in the face. I let him in, mostly because I wanted to hear what he had to say. He started rambling right away, launching into this sob story about how hard things had been since our parents found out about his infertility. He said they'd been relentless, blaming him for ruining their dreams of grandkids and threatening to cut him off if he didn't make it right. Jake tried to blame everything, his behavior growing up, his role in turning my parents against me, on stress. He said he'd been under so much pressure to be the perfect son that he didn't know how to handle it. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, wiping his eyes dramatically. "I just didn't know how else to deal with everything." Honestly, I wasn't buying it. Jake's actions weren't about stress. They were about control. He'd spent years making my life hell because he could, because he knew our parents would always take his side, and now he wanted me to swoop in and save him? Yeah, no. I let him talk until he finally got to the real reason he was there. "Ellie," he said, "I need your help. Mom and Dad are serious about cutting me off unless I can fix this. They need the family name to continue, and they think your baby is the answer. Please, just give the baby our last name. It's the only way to save our family." I couldn't help it. I laughed, like actually laughed out loud. "Jake," I said, "you've got to be kidding me. After everything you did to me, you want me to hand over my child to fix your mess? Not a chance." Jake looked stunned, like he genuinely thought I'd say yes. He tried to guilt trip me, accusing me of being petty and holding grudges. "This isn't about the past," I told him. "This is about protecting my family. My kids will have nothing to do with the people who treated me like I didn't matter." He kept pushing, saying how I was ruining his life by refusing to help him. He even tried to play the victim, saying he didn't deserve to be punished for something he couldn't control. "Ellie," he said, "if they cut me off, I'll lose everything." That's when I lost my patience. "Jake," I said, "you've spent your whole life taking from me my peace, my friends, even my parents' attention, and now you want to take from my kids? Absolutely not. If they cut you off, that's on them, not me. Maybe it's time you learned what it's like to stand on your own 2 feet." Jake stormed out after that, slamming the door behind him. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, relief, and a weird sense of closure. For the first time, I stood up to him and didn't let him manipulate me. It felt good. A few days later, Megan called me with an update. Apparently, my parents followed through on their threat and cut Jake off financially. They stopped paying for his house, his car, and everything else they'd been covering for him. Megan said Jake and Sarah were struggling to adjust to life without my parents' endless support. Sarah, who'd been used to living a cushy life, wasn't happy. Megan said she overheard Sarah complaining about how unfair it was that Jake couldn't just fix things with me. I almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered how she'd gone along with my parents' toxic behavior for years. So after Jake failed to get me to cave, my parents decided to step in themselves. I wasn't exactly surprised. It started with a phone call from my mom. I hadn't heard from her in years, literally years, so seeing her name pop up on my screen was jarring to say the least. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but I was curious to see what she had to say. I picked up, and she immediately launched into a rehearsed-sounding apology. "Ellie," she said, her voice dripping with this faux sweetness I hadn't heard since I was a kid, "I just wanted to say how sorry I am for everything. We've been thinking about you so much, and we miss you." "Miss me? Since when?" She kept going, trying to make it sound like they'd had this big epiphany about how they treated me. "I know we made mistakes," she said, "but we're family, and I think it's time we start fresh." I cut her off. "Is this about Jake?" There was a long pause on the other end. She clearly hadn't expected me to be so direct. "Well, yes," she admitted, her tone shifting. "But it's not just about him. It's about the family. We need to come together, Ellie. We've all been through so much." And then she started with the guilt trips. "You know how much this means to your father and me. All we want is to make things right. Your baby could bring this family back together. Don't you think it's time we put the past behind us?" I could feel my blood boiling. "Put the past behind us?" I said. "You mean the past where you treated me like I didn't exist? The past where you gave Jake everything and left me with nothing? That past?" She tried to backpedal, but I wasn't having it. I told her I wasn't interested in letting them use my child to fix their mistakes. She started crying, saying how much it hurt her to hear me talk that way. But I stood my ground. A few days later, my dad called. If my mom's tactic was guilt, my dad's was anger. He started off by saying how disappointed he was in me for being so selfish. He told me I was tearing the family apart and that I needed to grow up and think about the bigger picture. I let him rant for a while before cutting in. "Dad, let me make one thing clear. My baby is not your second chance. If you're so worried about the family name, maybe you should have thought about that earlier, way earlier." He didn't have much to say after that, but he tried one last jab. "You know, Ellie, we only want what's best for the family. If you can't see that, then I don't know what else to say." I'd had enough. I blocked them everywhere, and I haven't heard from them since. Meanwhile, I'm focusing on my life and what's coming. Ethan and I will be raising our kids in a loving, healthy environment, something I never had growing up. Megan and Ethan's family have become my support system, and I couldn't be more grateful for them. I've thought a lot about whether I should feel guilty for cutting off my family, especially Jake. But every time I think about it, I come back to the same conclusion. I don't owe them anything. They made their choices, and now they're dealing with the consequences. Jake and my parents can keep playing their games, but I'm done. I'm done being the scapegoat, the afterthought, the one who always had to bend to make them happy. I'm building a new life, one filled with love, respect, and the kind of family I always wanted but never had. Thanks for sticking with me through this story, Reddit. It's been a wild ride, but sharing it has been surprisingly cathartic. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away from the people who hurt you, no matter who they are.